Okay, so we are going to talk about types of organizational arrangements. So, how to organize your speech to make the most sense when you're delivering it, when you're writing it, when you're in the process of getting ready for the next speech, which is the informative speech. So what we're going to talk about are the types of patterns, and then the following 6 bullets are the types of patterns. So we're going to talk about those each in depth so that you can understand what they are and how you can use them for your speech. So organizational patterns is a pattern that will make or break your speech. It's a clear structure which compensates listeners' ability to review information. And you'll use different patterns for different types of speeches. So there are organizational patterns for informative, persuasive, and special occasion speeches. So they all need to be arranged differently and in the way that makes the most sense. The first one is chronological. So most of you probably use the chronological pattern of arrangement for your introductory speech. You told a story, you introduced yourself, all of those things come into play, and you do it in a chronological order. So you don't necessarily bounce around from point to point. It doesn't really make sense to start at the end of the story. You start at the beginning of the story. So chronological is also called temporal, and it follows the natural sequential order of the main points. So, like I said, switching points seems unnatural and might confuse the audience. The example that is there is from the book. So you'll see that it starts in 1962, 1980s, and then the end of the Cold War. So it goes in chronological order. They didn't start with the 1980s when the TCP and IP were created. They started at the beginning when the thought first came into play to create the internet. So if you're telling a story, if you're informing us about a process, you would probably use a chronological order because you would want to start at the beginning. You would want to start where the process starts, not where the process ends. The next one is a spatial pattern. Spatial is used to arrange a place, a scene, or an object. It's used to give a tour of a place. So the book uses the example of a national monument in New Mexico and explains it step by step. So maybe if in your introductory speech you talked about going on a trip somewhere, or something that shaped you, or something that made you who you are today, and it was a trip or a place or location, this would be a spatial pattern of arrangement. So you would start at the first thing you saw and then continue on as to how things continue to build upon each other or grow the way that they did. So the first encounter, and then after that you see, the watering hole, and after that you see the famous cliff carvings, and then the farthest reach of the park are the ancient ruins. So they started at the beginning and ended at the end. It's similar to chronological, but it's used if you're giving a tour of something. A causal pattern is known as cause and effect, when something is known to cause an effect. So make sure that it's causation and not correlation. So correlation would be something like the Bible Belt and Tornado Alley running right on top of each other. People have joked for years that this is cause and effect, right? All of these Bible thumpers live in Tornado Alley for a reason, and it's been kind of a joke, but that's not actually cause and effect. That's a correlation. So make sure that if you do use a cause and effects pattern of arrangement, that there is a cause that causes the effect. So the way that the example that the book gave, they gave the effect, and then they had another effect, and then the two causes that they found of that effect. So you can do it in that order, or you can start with the cause and then give the effect. Either way, you can flip it either way. Problem solution. So I've done an activity when I taught this class face-to-face. I've done an activity where I have my students use Texas Tech parking. Those of you who actually attend classes on campus or live in Lubbock know that Texas Tech parking has a huge problem. So I would have my students choose the parking problem and come up with a solution, and then they would have to present it in a way that followed this pattern of arrangement. So here's the problem. The problem is Texas Tech parking. A solution is to offer more parking, right? But they had to come up with a creative way to offer more parking, where we could put more parking, that kind of thing. So if you use this pattern of arrangement, you would define your problem. So you would present us with your problem and tell us what it is, and then offer a plausible solution. You could also offer solutions that have not worked in the past, and why your solution would be superior to the solution of whatever has been done in the past. So an example of that was satellite parking. So Texas Tech offered satellite parking for students who were kind of overflow. Well, now there's so many students that are overflow, we don't even have enough satellite parking. So we're completely out of parking. So they have offered solutions as to what other campuses do. They've compared to the University of Texas or Texas A&M, and compared how we could kind of incorporate what they've done to what we could do to make parking more efficient for students and for faculty, because it's difficult for faculty to find parking as well. So that's a good way to use the problem solution pattern of arrangement. And the next one is topical. Topical is when you can arrange your points in any order and there's no disruption. So in chronological or spatial, if you go out of order, it doesn't really make sense. But with topical, it doesn't matter what order you go in. So the example that the book gives is a really great example. So the thesis statement of this speech was, Chicago is an excellent place to establish a career. The reasons for that were accessible transportation, cultural variety, and economic stability. So it doesn't really matter how you put those 3 points. They're still equally weighted and they still make the same amount of sense any way that you put them. So all of them have equal weight. They can go in any order. They're not chronological. They're not in any particular pattern. They're just kind of thrown in there, which some of you might be able to use topical on your speeches, but most of you will use chronological. The next one is narrative. I don't have a whole lot about narrative because this is not a good idea. Your introductory speech was probably a narrative, and that's okay. But for your informative or persuasive speech, I suggest that you do not use a narrative pattern of arrangement. A narrative is just a story, and it's really difficult to get your point across in an informative speech, or especially a persuasive speech, with just a story. If you have a story in one of your points, then that's okay, but your whole speech should not be a story. So a narrative is when the speech consists of a story or a series of short stories with character, setting, plot, and vivid imagery. So you don't want to really do this for your informative speech. If you do this for your informative speech, it makes you look like you weren't really prepared. This was last minute. You kind of threw it together. And it's just not really a great pattern of arrangement to use, but it is an option. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. This is just a kind of a brief overview. You definitely need to read the text and figure out what pattern of arrangement you're going to use for your speech. If you have questions about what would be best, what would fit best with your informative speech, let me know and I will be happy to help you. If you have any questions at all, please just send me an email. Reach out to me if you would rather talk on the phone. I'm totally okay with that, and we will get something set up to where we can get you on the right track.